Hello and welcome back to the second half of the video lectures on the current human subject regulations for US275 scientific ethics. So what we're going to focus in on is the Office for Human Research Protections and what they do within the government and how they're in place to really kind of monitor the research that's occurring with human subjects, as well as hopefully to ensure that these human subjects are treated in a respectful and an ethical way. And so the Office for Human Research Protections is actually housed within the US Department of Health and Human Services, and it applies to all institutions that are funded by the Department of Health and Human Services. So that would be things like the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and a whole variety of other agencies as well. But it basically, it applies pretty much universally to the majority of human research that's occurring within the United States. And so the first thing that OHRP, the Office of Human Research Protection, does is it has an institution that is going to be doing human research and receiving government funds for it. They have to fill out a fairly detailed, what's referred to as an assurance of compliance, where it basically goes through and describes how it is that they're going to set up the policies and procedures at their institutions and what those policies and procedures are in order to protect humans that are participating in research studies. And so what they're going to be able to do is basically have a good idea of how well that institution and their scientists and doctors understand the rules and be able to indicate if there are any areas that they need to be improving on. So the regulations that we've talked about up until this point, within the Belmont report, the National Research Act, the Common Rule, what we're looking at are a series of rules that need to be in place for individuals to receive support to conduct research that involves human subjects. So we talked about the institutional assurances already. That's the assurance of compliance. Then we're going to look at the Institutional Review Board, which I'll refer to as the IRB, just because it's a whole lot easier to pronounce. The Institutional Review Board, the IRB review, and a little bit more on this concept of informed consent. Now, if we take a look at this idea of institutional assurances, what we have is this idea that multiple people at an institution are going to be responsible for ensuring that human research subjects are treated in a safe and respectful and ethical way. And so at each institution, there'll be an institutional official, and this is the person that kind of signs off on the government documents. This is the person that is the kind of ultimate liaison between the Office of Human Research Protection and the institution. They learn about any changes in the expectations and the rules. They're the ones that ensure that all the policies and procedures are in place, and so they're going to be that kind of high-level person that is setting the tone or making sure that the institution is ready to do appropriate and ethical biomedical research on human beings. The IRB, the Institutional Review Board, is going to be a committee that is going to be involved with reviewing protocols or reviewing requests for scientists and doctors to work with human research subjects. So they're going to go through and evaluate whatever it is that they want to do, making sure that we've got the respect and ethics built into the study. And they also continually monitor human subject research to make sure that no adverse events are occurring, that bad things aren't developing, that we may need to change the procedure or even terminate the study because it's causing more harm than benefit. And then ultimately, the person on the ground, the investigator down here, this is going to be the scientist or the doctor that's going to be involved with directly supervising the research study. And they're the primary responsibility for protecting the rights and welfare of the human research subjects, because they're the ones that are leading the team that is going through and working with the human subjects. So the Institutional Review Board, the IRB, is a committee. Arcadia, like a lot of institutions, has an Institutional Review Board. You know, we've got a lot of studies that are done in psychology, physical therapy, physician assistant studies, public health, you know, education, a whole variety of departments within the university are doing human subject research in a variety of ways. And so the committee is going to be composed of a variety of individuals, again, with varying experience and expertise, as well as a diversity of backgrounds. And so the Arcadia IRB has people from sociology, anthropology, and criminal justice. They have people from education. They have people from psychology, people from physical therapy, from physician assistant studies, from a whole range of different areas that do different types of human subject research so that they can bring a broad perspective to the table. Diversity of the backgrounds. So you've got some that are doing, you know, biomedical research, some doing educational research, some doing, you know, public health or public policy research. And again, they're all going to come into this IRB with a range of perspectives that's going to be important for evaluating the ethical kind of standards of the research that's being proposed. In addition, the committee needs to be sensitive to community attitudes. And so the IRB is going to have an external member, so a member of the community that's not a doctor, that's not affiliated with the university, that's there to represent the views of the community in this. Now, in order for a study to begin, a researcher, an investigator, a doctor, a scientist basically has to write a research protocol together, submit it to the IRB, and the IRB has to approve it before the research can start. And sometimes, you know, this could mean, you know, a couple months or, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 months to get it in a condition that it's kind of approved and all the protections that are necessary are in place. You know, you can't just start and add the protections later. You have to have everything right at the start when you start working with the research subjects. The IRB reviews all of the human subject protocols annually. Again, making sure that nothing's changed, making sure that they're still following the guidelines, they're still doing what they said they were going to do, and most importantly, that there are no kind of harmful effects or adverse events that are occurring by individuals participating in the study. Now, it is possible that the IRB can go through, and if they determine that things are being done unethically or that there are increased risks for the subjects participating in the study, the IRB can either suspend or terminate a research protocol. So they could go in and say, okay, you're done. This study is done until you can, you know, show you have greater protections for your subjects, or this is just so out of control, you know, your subjects are not being helped, they're being harmed in this research, we're going to end it outright. And so they have a lot of authority over the research that's going to be occurring, because they're really that kind of institutional kind of body responsible for making sure that everything done at the university is being done ethically and appropriately. The next concept within the Office of Human Research Protections is this expanded view of informed consent. And now what we're looking at now is much more detailed, much more elaborate, and much more specific than that concept of free consent established in the Nuremberg Code. What we're looking at is the informed consent, you know, in the, you know, the 2020s, is the idea that this is going to be an educational process where the researcher, the scientist or the doctor is really going to be having an educational talk with the potential research subject in a way that the research subject is going to be able to understand what is going to be going on with their involvement within this study. And so it's an educational process that kind of fully discloses the nature of the research, talks about the potential benefits, the potential risks, explains completely what the individual is going to be doing. You know, you sign up in the study, and you're going to be coming back once a week and have your weight taken, so we can take a look at that. Or you're going to come back every day and we're going to draw blood. That's a very different study because, you know, you're coming back every day as opposed to once a week. One, you stand on a scale. The other one, you get poked and prodded with a needle every day to draw a little bit of blood off. So it's important that the subject understands what it is that they're going to be doing. And then finally, the subject has to have that voluntary choice to participate. Included with that is the ability to voluntarily withdraw at any point within that with no penalty. So again, we're wanting to make sure that an individual participating in these research studies understands what's going on, is able to make a decision on their own, understands the risks and benefits, and chooses to participate after having all that information. OHRP also kind of expands on this idea of protection of vulnerable populations. And so there are very explicit guidelines on what needs to be done if you're working with pregnant women, human fetuses or neonates, children, or prisoners. You know, all individuals that have an increased risk at participating in the studies. Now, it doesn't say that these people can't be used in a research study. It just means that there have to be protections in place so that we're, you know, minimizing the potential harm that could be occurring to them. And because of that, these areas, these vulnerable populations or studies on these vulnerable populations are looked at in a lot more detail than all studies. But at this point, all studies are looked at in pretty finite or pretty deep details. Now, it is possible that you can waive the consent process. And so the informed consent process, we said, was, you know, educating the potential research subject, informing them about what's going on. But there are times in which it is possible to get a waiver of consent. This is generally used when the research involves no more than minimal risk to the subject, and the waiver does not adversely affect the rights or the welfare of the subjects. And so a waiver or consent process, you know, is often looked at with, you know, completely anonymous surveys, or, you know, an observational study where, you know, somebody is, you know, sitting along the side of the road and kind of observing, you know, how many cars stop at the stoplight and the person is, you know, talking on their phone, holding it, you know, in their hand. Or, you know, how many people are, you know, coming to a complete stop at a stop sign as opposed to, you know, kind of rolling through it or, you know, blowing through it completely. You know, they can't, you know, get the consent. You can't run up, tap on the window and say, hey, I'm going to be looking at whether or not you're using your phone. Will you agree to that? And so that's a waiver of the consent process. Generally, while many of the institutions within the common rule allow for this waiver of consent, the Food and Drug Administration, again, this is a little bit of a difference between the common rule with most of the federal agencies and the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration doesn't allow for waiver of consent except for in, excuse me, in very specific emergency situations. So another example of this is if you're doing a survey, if you do an informed consent, you know, you're going to collect information about the person, potentially demographic, identifiable information, in gaining their consent, having them sign a document. But now having this document with their name on it and their information on it could cause potential harm for them, because then you know, there's a risk that, you know, it could be known that they were involved in the study. And if it, you know, is the only record linking the subject to the research, then you often are able to get a waiver of the consent process. Some types of studies are also exempt from review because they're essentially the type of things that don't have risks associated with them. So this isn't to say that the research can do whatever it is that they want with the subjects. They still have to be ethical in their treatment of the research subjects. You still need to protect them. But it basically means that there's no risk or minimal risk to the human subject. So examples of this would be, an educational faculty member doing research on what type of pedagogy within the classroom, what type of strategies within the classroom are most effective for their students. Another example would be going through and studying, existing data, records, or specimens. And so, going into a hospital and looking at patient charts and not collecting identifiable information, but, determining how many patients had this type of disease, how many were treated in this way and how many were treated in that way, and what was the outcome. Or, taking a look at specimens. You give a blood sample for a study and they use a small amount of it and they've got a portion of it that's still remaining. Potentially they could use that remaining blood in another study. Again, it has to be kind of talked about with the IRB, but it potentially could be considered exempt because it doesn't pose additional risk to the subject. This is probably a dramatic oversimplification of the IRB and the human research protections. If you're involved in human research studies, you're going to get a lot more of this. At Arcadia, we have an online training through an outside agency that all individuals have to complete prior to becoming involved with human subject research. You have to be certified, you have to take a test, all of that. That says that you understand what the rules are and that you're going to follow them and act in an ethical fashion. So hopefully this will give you kind of a good overview about some of the key concepts on human subject research. What I've got in terms of a reading for this is, it's a little bit dated now at this point. It's a 2004 article, Ethics in Clinical Research, A History of Human Subject Protections and Practical Implementation of Ethical Standards. But it gives a good historical overview as well as highlights the key areas, the key kind of advances in promoting ethics in human research. And so, read through that. Thank you. As always, if you have any questions on this or anything else, feel free to email me. Thank you and have a great day.